It was a cold so deep it felt supernatural. A frost that crept into the bones of Simpson County, Kentucky. On this last night of 1841, inside the big house, the masters slept. Their bellies full from New Year's Eve celebration, their dreams untroubled. They did not hear the floorboard creak. They did not see the shadow, darker than the midnight hall, moving with a terrible purpose. And they would never feel the winter air kiss the sharpened edge of the axe moments before it fell. This is not a ghost story. This is a story of a rage so profound, so carefully nurtured, that it could only end in blood. What could drive a human being to such a brutal, final act? And was the infamous, mysterious cold that night merely a weather event, or something far more sinister, aiding a macabre revenge? To understand the fury, we must first understand the cage. Our story is set on the plantation of Achilles Black. To the outside world, Black was a pillar of the community, a wealthy, respected landowner in the antebellum South. But his respectability, his comfort, his entire world, was built on a foundation of brutal, dehumanizing violence, the institution of slavery. And at the heart of this story is a woman history has tried to forget. Her name was Jane, not a last name, just Jane, recorded in ledgers not as a human being, but as property, an asset, a number. She lived in a constant state of powerlessness, where every aspect of her life, from her body to her children, should she have had any, was controlled by the whims of Achilles. Black and his family thought her days were a relentless cycle of backbreaking. Labor. She cooked their food but likely ate scraps. She cleaned their fine rooms but returned to a cramped, cold cabin. She nurtured their children while facing the constant terror of her own family being torn apart on the auction block. This was the unbearable tension of the antebellum South, a world of genteel luxury existing only through unimaginable cruelty. For Jane, every smile she was forced to wear was a lie. Every obedient yes, master, was a betrayal of her own spirit. And beneath the surface of her compliance, a storm was brewing. A storm sharpened by years of humiliation, and one that was about to be unleashed with the swing of an axe. The specific catalyst is lost to history. Perhaps it was a particularly vicious insult that day. Perhaps it was the looming threat of being sold down the river, a death sentence for any enslaved person, severing all familial ties forever. Or perhaps it was simply the final, insignificant straw that broke the back of a woman who had been carrying a mountain of pain for a lifetime. We can only imagine Jane's state of mind as the Black family celebrated, as they laughed and drank. To the coming new year, she was a ghost in the room, serving, watching, planning. The bitter cold that had gripped Kentucky was her unwitting ally. It meant no one would be out and about. It meant sounds were muffled by the frost. It meant the world was asleep. As the house fell into a drunken stupor, Jane moved. She would have had to retrieve the axe. Did she feel its weight? Did she run her thumb along its edge, contemplating the finality of its purpose? This wasn't a spontaneous burst of anger. This was a calculated act of war. Every step she took from the quarters to the big house was a step into the unknown, a conscious crossing of a line from which there was no return. She entered the silent house. The only sound was the wind whispering against the windows, a chorus to her resolve. She passed rooms where the Black children slept. Did she hesitate? Did a flicker of humanity give her pause? Or was her resolve forged in the fire of unspeakable injustice, absolute? Her footsteps, light as a feather yet heavy with destiny, carried her down the final hallway. The master bedroom door stood before her, slightly ajar. Inside, Achilles Black and his wife slept, completely vulnerable, utterly unaware that the system of absolute power they embodied was moments from collapsing in on them. Jane pushed the door open. The axe felt heavy in her hands, a tool of liberation and destruction. The world held its breath, But the silence of the Kentucky night was about to be shattered forever. There was no monologue, no grand declaration, just the wet, sickening, unmistakable thwack of cold iron meeting warm flesh. A gasp, choked and brief, then another swing, and another. The sound is horrific, intimate, and efficient. In the pitch blackness of the room, Jane was guided by a lifetime of knowing its layout and a rage that needed no light. The violence was swift, brutal, and absolute. It was not a clean death. It was the physical manifestation of years of pent-up agony, of stolen years, of shattered dignity. The sound of the axe was not the ring of a battlefield. It was something far more primal. A butcher's sound, a wood splitter's sound, a sound that should never, ever be heard in a bedroom. When it stopped, the silence that rushed back in was deafening, heavier, and more terrifying than before. The only sounds now were Jane's own ragged breaths, coming in ragged gasps, and the slow, steady drip, drip, drip on the wealthy wooden floor. Two of the most powerful people in Simpson County were gone, extinguished not by arrival, but by the woman they listed as inventory. Jane stood in the overwhelming darkness, the coppery smell of blood thick in the air. The axe, suddenly impossibly heavy, slipped from her hands and clattered to the floor. The deed was done, the revenge was taken, and in that deafening silence, a terrifying new reality dawned. What do you do after you have killed a king? The discovery at dawn sent seismic waves of panic through the community. The unthinkable had happened. The investigation was swift and merciless. Suspicion fell immediately on the enslaved population, and Jane was quickly arrested. Her trial was a foregone conclusion, a swift performance of so-called justice designed to reassert the social order she had violently challenged. She was convicted of murder and sentenced to death. The system that had failed her for so long now worked with brutal efficiency to silence her forever. But while the state could end Jane's life, it could not kill her story. It became a dark, whispered legend, a tale that simultaneously horrified, and in some secret corners, perhaps inspired the enslaved community. It was a stark reminder to the powerful that the human spirit can only be crushed for so long. So we are left with haunting questions. Do we remember Jane as a murderer? Or as a freedom fighter? A monster? Or a woman who, in the most horrific way imaginable, seized the power over life and death that had been wielded against her for decades? Her story is a bloody Rorschach test, and what you see in it says everything about how you view justice, power, and resistance. Her axe didn't just end two lives. It swung a crack into the very foundation of the plantation myth. It exposed the raw, violent terror that was necessary to maintain slavery. A system built on absolute submission will always live in fear of the moment that submission ends. So, was Jane's act a solitary, monstrous crime? Or was it, in its most brutal and personal form, an act of war?